So it's my great pleasure to be joined by Vince Horn today. Vince, how are you doing?
Hey, good. Good to be here
Great.
with you.
So to kick us off, I wonder if you'd like to just take a couple of minutes just to introduce yourself and some of the interesting pies that you have your fingers in right now.
Yeah, so hello to, I guess, the Lunarpunks.
Lunarpunk dreams, Lunarpunks, exactly.
So I'm introducing myself to Lunarpunks. Cool. My name is Vince Horn. I'm a fellow Lunarpunk, and I'm a longtime, I guess, meditator, um, practitioner, first and foremost, but I also hold the role of teacher and facilitator. I'm a Dharma teacher in the Southeast Asian lineages of Thailand and Burma or Myanmar. And my primary teachers were Jack Cornfield and Trudy Goodman on my mother's side, and Daniel Ingram and Kenneth Folk on my father's side. And I say that jokingly. These are two different sets of teachers that I learned a lot from that were very connected to each other. Um, and for those people that are interested in looking up those folks, they're just people that are known in the Western American Dharma world. Um, and so my training is both in that sort of Buddhist contemplative kind of background as a longtime meditator. I did a lot of retreat practice in my 20s. I spent a total of a year on silent retreat, but mostly was doing like a month here, a month there, 6 weeks, 2 months, a week, 10 days, just kind of sprinkling as much as I could in between going to school and working and doing all the other things. So I've had a very much of a full-time householder path life, as we would say in Buddhist terms. Like I've lived in the world. I've intentionally not taken the monastic route, although you could say that retreat practice is a very monastic inspired form of practice. So I've been influenced for sure by the monastic approach. But I also, at the same time, am interested in all the things that I think people listening to this are interested in. Technology, being a child of the 80s, a geriatric millennials. I've heard people jokingly refer to those of us born in the early 80s. And video games and, all music and psychedelic culture and psychedelics themselves. And relationships and sex and heartbreak and family. I'm a father. I have a 6-year-old, first grade. All of these things are also important to me. Starting things, being an entrepreneur, starting organizations. I helped start a project called Buddhist Geeks in 2006, and that became a very influential podcast. We kind of rode the early wave of Web 2, right? It was starting to kind of blow up, and I feel like something similar is happening now, which is probably why we're talking with Web 3. And I imagine a lot of our conversation might center around stuff like that. So I won't get into it, but
I'll just say thank you for creating Buddhist Geeks. And as I mentioned to you before the call, it was actually very important to me when I was just kind of discovering Buddhism and kind of other Eastern traditions for the first time those years back. And now
oh, good. I'm glad it was a resource.
Crossing again in the context of Web3, Solarpunk, Lunarpunk, as we might come on to. And so something else that I heard you mention on the Duma Optimism podcast that you did about a month ago, which I can recommend to anyone listening, is that you have a kind of homestead. You have some land, and you're kind of trying to live in something like a regenerative way. I wondered if you wanted to a word on that as well.
Yeah, I guess we're on the early stages of the regenerative path, and. Yeah, for the last several years, I've gotten kind of obsessed with agriculture, learning how to garden and farm for my grandparents, my grandfather in particular, who are still alive and well in their late 80s and totally self-sufficient and healthy. And I think it's because of how they live. And part of how they live is they grow a lot of their own food and they stay active. So that became of real interest to me in recent years, especially having starting to grow our own family, so to speak.
I think we could probably describe you, Vince, as a kind of like OG Solarpunk, or like you were Solarpunk before anyone had sort of even sort of uttered those words in a way, given your range of interests and practice, even like from the the spirituality side of things to the technology to the agriculture and regeneration to some of the other things you mentioned, like kind of sexuality and psychedelics. So it feels appropriate then to ask you, what is your relationship to Solarpunk? Is it a term that you've heard much about, that you identify with in any way, that you use perhaps? Yeah, how does it fit in for you?
Yeah, it is a phrase that once I heard, which was quite a long time ago. I can't even remember when the first time that phrase hit my register. It resonated. It was a term that resonated deeply. And it was like, oh yeah, this is a way of conceiving of a possible future, very much in a science fiction kind of way, of like visualizing and imagining alternative realities that we might live into, ones that are more ecologically sound, and where we're taking the best of technology and channeling that toward to the well-being of all beings, all earthlings. And it's a vision that's very planetary in scope, because of the term solar implies that. And punk, the radical rejection of having such a narrow frame of reference as to be just human. I think that to me is the key of what solar invites, is that planetary. It's like shifting awareness to a larger scope and seeing things from a new point of view, instead of just being in the human world, being like in the kind of more of a cosmic perspective, or a solar perspective, really. So yeah, I love that term. It really resonated with me when I first heard it. And I love the imagery and the bright green vividness. It reminded me of some of the writing on like worldchanging.org, if you remember Alex Steffen's project, where he'd write about like a bright green future. That I was obsessed with that blog in the early aughts.
And so I've already mentioned this, that you're on the Duma Optimism podcast. So, and
right,
that has a slightly darker feeling to it. And I think you mentioned the term, what is it? Let me get this right. Apocalyptivism. I know.
This is the problem with the term. It's hard to say. Apocalyptimism.
Okay, so this is like apocalypse and optimism put together.
That's right. Similar concept.
So, I mean, Solarpunk has, one of the reasons many people like it is because it does have this very positive, optimistic vibe to it. So
yes.
But it sounds like you're also, certainly prepared to face up to the extremely difficult situation that humanity finds itself in.
Yes.
This time. So
yes.
How does some of the undeniable challenge that we're seeing right now fit with that Solarpunk vision for you?
That's a great question. I think the mature Solarpunk has to reject a naive techno-optimism and techno-utopianism of just thinking that technology is sufficient, and that if we just put all of our ingenuity and creativity toward building better technologies without examining the frame in which those technologies are built, without examining the contexts that our technologies are embedded in, that simply isn't sufficient. And that faith in some kind of future working out magically for us because we just focus on this one thing, building technology that's better.
Whether that's solar panels or regenerative agriculture or web3, they're all in some sense. And and that takes us pretty much to the boundary with Lunarpunk, which is actually, as I've framed this podcast, or one of the framings is, who do we need to be as people to usher in this Solarpunk future, if indeed the technology alone isn't enough? So similar kind of play on Lunarpunk. What does Lunarpunk mean to you? How does that speak to you?
Well, I loved what you wrote on your website about it. It was a very evocative kind of imagery of like what happens when the sun goes down on the Solarpunk city or community, in whatever form that community takes. Well, things chill out and people are more relaxed, and we do what we normally do at night. Like we throw on music and we chill and we do our rituals to unwind and practice. And And I think there, like where you're talking about in your description of the mystical, the personal, the strange, the weird, in good sense of like exploring who we really are in this world that we've built, the solar punk world.
And so then the question is, do you have some sense of who we are needing to become to usher in that solar punk future? What are because we've already name dropped some of the technologies at least, but is there some similar kind of like headline list of ways in which that humanity needs to develop to the qualities that we need to move towards?
Yeah, I think the way I look at this is very conditioned by my Buddhist training in that I can see it in terms of things we need to develop as humans, and then I can also see it as our nature, which we need to reconnect with. And our nature is that we're already interconnected with our environment. We've evolved to be in relationship to everything that we come into contact with. And we further evolved to be a hyper-connected species with a global nervous system.
Yeah.
So we're interconnected with the entire globe in theory and in principle. In practice, where it's not so great, the connections are not quite, we're not quite measuring the right things and responding to the right things and doing the right things to take care of our ecology. Like that's clear. So
it's I framed it in terms of development, but really the answer I gave was more about kind of remembering
so there's this kind of remembering who we really are, and that has to do with remembering our deep interbeingness, or as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, our interconnectedness. And that can be, it's not just a concept, it's a practice. It's a way of being where we are intertwined, and we get better at being able to be with our own experience and knowing what it's like to be me, and also be with others and with everything and know what that's like, and actually be open, not all the time. Like we can't be always open, otherwise we dissolve into everything. And that's fine temporarily. But we've got to, as one of my teachers would say, we've got to remember our Buddha nature and our zip code. That's Jack Cornfield. And so it's like you gotta hold both truths, that you are like the infinite abyss that all things spring from. And like, we've got how much more time to talk, and how many more topics do you want to cover?
So and you're someone, a teacher, but a Dharma teacher that as I understand has some experience in these practices that you mentioned to help people tune in to those fundamental aspects of nature, reality, to kind of start practicing that remembering. Something I've heard you mention. I'm wondering if it's relevant in this context. Is social meditation? Is this an appropriate time to say a few words on that?
Yeah, Lunarpunks do social meditation, I think, or something like it.
Tell us more,
because what part of the punk movement for me, as a millennial meditation teacher, and Dharma teacher, is looking at how meditation has been framed previously in previous epochs. So prior to the internet, we framed meditation in largely individualist terms, like in the modern era. Like meditation is this practice that you do, and you go and you sit in your cushion. You imagine being in your like meditation room, or out in like a hut in the mountains, right? And it's largely seen. It's not always practiced this way, but it's largely seen as a solo endeavor. Now, obviously, like I went to retreat centers that were group retreats, and but we were all silent. We never talked to each other. So in a sense, it was like you were by yourself together. And so that sense of individual focus is something that I began to, over time, through seeing the tension in how it actually experienced that form of practice in my life, and how I was not able to sufficiently integrate the kinds of experiences that happened in the depths of my individual solo experience with my life in the world. That tension of not being able to integrate the two is what led me to reject the very notion of individualist focused meditation, and instead start to conceive of meditation as a networked phenomena. You know, that it's like the internet, we're all interconnected, and we see that day to day. Digital natives are aware that their identity changes as they move through different networks. Something I learned from Alexander Bard's work really explicitly, but also something I've experienced as a digital native.
So tell us more about the actual practice of social meditation then. What does this involve?
It's really simple. One of my early teachers, Kenneth Folk, he had this brilliant idea to do a traditional mindfulness practice that he learned in the monasteries of Burma and Malaysia, which is a very simple practice of just using a word or two to label your experience moment to moment, but doing it internally, silently, so that you can be on retreat and everyone be walking and sitting and eating and doing their thing, following the retreat schedule. And then internally, they're trying to notice every moment of it and do like a little audible note to themselves about what's happening. And it's a brilliant technique because it engages the conceptual mind in the meditation. It gives it a job. and you know, for some people, we love to categorize shit, right? So it's like, oh yeah, like I want to tell you exactly what this is. It's, you know, okay, this is seeing, and then there's thinking, and it's an auditory thought, and I'm planning what I'm going to say next, and I'm laughing also at myself, and there's humor, and it's joyful, and it's pleasant and bubbly, and you know, like, yeah, this is fun. I can describe my experience.
Yeah. Okay. Super interesting. Yeah, I'm very attracted to the idea that Lunarpunk could involve the experimentation with development of new styles of meditation, or at least find that there are certain styles of meditation that are particularly useful or relevant right now for this scene at this point in history. So yeah, I'd love to continue that conversation over the coming weeks and months. But now I might turn us towards SanghaDAO, InterbeingDAO, Metasangha.
Oh no, all these names.
Yeah, so these I've just name dropped 3 projects there that I understand you're involved with all of those, probably more as well, on the kind of like intersection of like Buddhism and web3. So I'd love you to explain to us what these projects are, how they're different, how they relate, and perhaps your involvement with them as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe the easiest way to try to describe what this all is it's an attempt to describe the contours of the emerging DAOification of the Web3 update to what we've been doing for now 12 years with Buddhist Geeks. And like I said, we were born of Web2, the participatory web, you know, where everyone started to be able to become a producer. Like that was how we were able to do what we did. Yeah. Without podcasting and blogging, there'd be no Buddhist Geeks because we were a bunch of nobodies in like freshmen in college with almost no experience, but with some like web skills and some audio production skills. And we could do a podcast. So Web 2, fast forward to Web 3, and you know the whole thing of how people participate and co-construct networks is changing, and we see the real downsides of the Web 2 platforms, where all the value got sucked up, you know, in a kind of hyper unequal ways to the top. And so many of us who participated in these early, like, what do we have to show for it? You know. Yeah. Followers
that actually belong to Facebook or Instagram,
right?
In some sense.
Yeah, and in a way, it's like we can see now the idea of being able to like have some real kinds of stake and voice in emerging organizational forms that are more distributed and decentralized. That just makes a lot of sense as an evolution of the web to me. As a person who's been riding the waves of the web, and as a, you know, someone who's like always wondering what the hell is this thing going to be.
So let's hear more about those particular projects then, if you will. So
okay,
what do you say? SanghaDAO, InterbeingDAO.
Yeah, I'll start with SanghaDAO. So yeah. SanghaDAO is really that's where all this began in a way. So I was having a conversation with a friend named Kevin Awaki.
think I listened to it. It was on Buddhist Geeks, right?
It was on Buddhist Geeks, called Dharmas and DAOs.
Yeah.
And Kevin is the founder, one of the founders, I'm not sure if he's the sole founder or not, of Gitcoin, which is an important project helping fund public good and open source software. And he's also a Dharma practitioner and meditator. And so he's like, hey, Vince, like, wonder if the Dharma and DAO, like, is the time right? You know, because I had explored that in 2017 during the ICO boom, and was even supporting a project called the Lotus Network that was at least theorizing about this intersection at the time, early theorizing, and but nothing really got built. And so then we were like, well, yeah, we should at least have the conversation, put it out as a beacon, see if anyone shows up into a Discord. You know, just do the standard DAO play. Not know what the fuck we're doing.
And so what happened?
Well, what's happened is it's been kind of confusing and slow moving, but given the starting conditions. But what's happening now is that there's some people who are starting to kind of like just step up and want to do things, and some really interesting and bright folks who have shown up and had great ideas. And so there's like some semblance of a kind of basic architecture of like the organization emerging. There's a multi-sig account with a little bit of money, and we haven't used any of it yet.
Have you meditated together yet? Or?
We haven't even done, well, we've done a little bit of social meditation on the Discord channel, just, noting, but no, and really we haven't, the focus isn't on us as a community, like a normal kind of community, like we're going to get together and I'm going to be a teacher and you're going to be a student or anything like that, or it's a peer. It's more like we want to make a space for whatever wants to emerge in this intersection point between Web3 and Dharma, and just see like what's already happening out there. There's already projects happening actually. And what are they doing? And what can we learn from each other? And could we help get resources to the people that have ideas in this space and form a kind of meta learning community around this space?
Well, maybe let's come back to that bigger question in a second, but if I can just ask you to introduce the other two projects that I've heard mentioned, which are InterbeingDAO and Metasangha.
Yeah. Okay. So these are all like my DAO dreams, basically. These are all the DAOs that I imagine would need to co-arise in order to create a more, the idea of an ecosystem is really important in Web3. And I like also the metaphor that I've heard Reiki Corden use with HiFiDAO, which is the organ system, like the human organ system. We have all these differentiated systems that work to do different functions, and they work together for the whole. So to me, there's some holistic emerging ecosystem of ideas, technologies, practices, community that needs to kind of all emerge together. And that's what I'm attempting to kind of articulate in a very proto way, like early way. And it probably will be wrong. And there's probably a lot of other people that are working on things like InterbeingDAO. It's just a beacon light. Again, it's just to say, hey, we've been working on developing these open source psychotechnologies of social meditation, and it's like, it's a co-evolving process now. We're developing new techniques on a regular basis. Can you
give us some, just so for the benefit of our audience, at least, can you give some other examples of psychotechnologies?
Yeah. So in this case, a psychotechnology is a standardized way of like altering your perception and your cognition and how you perceive and understand the world. So in this case, InterbeingDAO is interested in psychotechnologies of wisdom and compassion that are also open source. They're offered freely in the same way that much of Web3 is offered. So that we can build a robust ecosystem. Even if our idea fails, maybe some part of it can become part of a future iteration that works.
So you have a form on the InterbeingDAO site where people can sort of submit their psychotechnology of wisdom or compassion, right? So what kinds of things have been submitted, or at least are you anticipating being submitted there?
So a few people have submitted some really cool stuff. Some collaborators I know who are already doing these kinds of practices, but like in Russian and Ukrainian, and other people who are doing other kinds of novel, kind of new combination approaches to healing modalities, for instance. So things like that, I anticipate it to be pretty broad spectrum because it's a pretty open type of definition. And wisdom and compassion is just, that's the filter. It's like, is what you're doing, because you could be doing psychotech to like just make yourself feel good, or you could build a technology to do all kinds of things, and even nefarious things. So, having a values filter, to me, that's important. And then just putting a beacon out there and saying, hey, we should all be connected in some sense if we're doing something that's open source, it's a psychotech, and it's aimed in this general direction.
Okay, so the open source piece seems important.
Yes,
well.
It's a clear differentiator, because there are people doing psychotechnologies of wisdom and compassion that are proprietary. Yeah. I have friends that are working on these projects, and I'm trying to encourage them instead to check this out.
Of course, it's a big issue in the psychedelic community right now about huge amounts of money flooding into the psychedelic space, often to fund kind of privatized research and like expensive private clinics, people filing kind of IP, stuff. And it's not enough of what's going on there, as far as I'm concerned, is open source. At least there's a lot of more potential. So yeah, I think that's
right.
Really add that qualifier, or to make it clear that that's the kind of stuff you're interested in here. But I'm understanding that it could be psychedelics, or it could be breath work, or it could be various forms of body work, as long as it's open source and for the purposes of growing wisdom and compassion. I understand.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and as long as it's a novel psychotechnology, so it's because there's a lot of really good psychotech that's privatized and trademarked, and so you can't just take that and say, hey, this is open source. You have to actually, the innovators have to be the ones to say, hey, we're open sourcing this. Nice. And we're going to create a new kind of ecosystem of this kind of tech where we can really feed off of each other, and we can out collaborate the privatized model of psychotech.
It actually reminds me of the work of Jamie Wheel. Do you remember Jamie Wheel?
Yes, absolutely.
You read his book, Recapture the Rapture?
Some parts of it, yes. And I've heard him in a lot of podcast dialogues.
He's saying something similar, like,
yes.
It's been a little while since I read it, but having previously heard him speak a fair amount about psychedelics, the book actually says, forget about psychedelics, basically, because like what name of the game is now is finding a psychotechnology, a combination of psychotechnologies that can be scaled very cheaply, very rapidly, to have a big impact on a short amount of time, because we ain't got that long in the context.
That's right.
Crisis. So, yeah. And he says, interestingly, psychedelics aren't really that interesting in that context, because they're still illegal. If they had become legal 5-10 years ago when people were first campaigning, then maybe things would be different. But the fact is, they are still legal in most parts of the world, in most states in the US. It's happening too slowly. So where else can we look? And as far as I remember, he kind of comes up with this combination of breath work, perhaps enhanced by various kind of gases like nitrous oxide and carbogen mixes and so on, which are drugs, substances in some sense, but like, extremely safe as substances go. In combination with dance and music and so on. So kind of like, basic stuff in a way.
Shamanic tech.
Yeah, but when combined can have profound impacts. But crucially, the idea is saying like, how can we scale this? And so I don't think he talks about it so much in terms of open source, but that's kind of certainly a link there of like, there's no point in just having like these niche psychotechnologies available to a handful of extremely rich people. Or at least that's not interesting to me or you from the sounds of things. It's about like how we can like offer things truly accessible and scalable. So that's
right.
Those points of view, yeah.
That's absolutely right. And part of it is scaling the technology, and part of it scaling the community. And to me, those two have to co-arise. Yeah. And that's the thing that maybe the web3 world in large part doesn't understand in full. That this is the outside and the inside of the same damn thing.
Well, this is certainly a topic that I'm interested in. So please say more on this. So, when we talk about growth, development, scaling in Web3, it's very often on the technological things, and of course, how can we make Ethereum faster and cheaper and great? It's
important things,
kind of stuff. But like, this element of like scaling community, scaling wisdom, scaling compassion. Even I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah,
tentatively make steps in that direction.
I've been thinking a lot about scaling lately, and another name for it would be, well, another way of talking about it would be to talk about your reach, right? Like, how much reach do you have? And that reach, it occurred to me recently, and it reminded me of kind of Ken Wilber's work, integral philosopher who I studied with a long time ago, then lost touch with, and then came back around to in recent years. And in his work, he talks about reach, and he talks about reach in terms of two dimensions. One is span, and then the other is depth. So it's like your reach can, you can scale in a span-like way, scale wide, or you can scale deep. And a lot of what we focus on is trying to scale fairly deep with a span of about 1,000 to 2,000 person learning communities. With Buddhist Geeks.
Who's the Buddhist Geeks?
Buddhist Geeks, yeah. So over the last several years, we've done multiple iterations of virtual practice and learning community, and we found that there's this optimal span and depth for us, because we were interested in the depth dimension, and you can't go as wide if you're going deep. Like depth requires relationship and time and cultivation, so it doesn't scale in the same way. And so to me, it's like, if we're going to build an ecosystem focused on leveraging these kind of open source psychotechnologies, remixing them, innovating, it has to happen in communities, in lots of communities, and being brought into communities. And so that's why we're focused on like training facilitators and social meditations. Like, come and learn these things and then bring them into wherever you're bringing them, make it part of your open source psychotech toolkit.
So is there some overlap, or at least potential overlap, between Buddhist Geeks and InterbeingDAO then, from what you just said? Or how do those two fit together?
Yeah. So Buddhist Geeks right now is the the nonprofit organization that we've been operating as and under. And right now our main goal is like almost like part of it is helping this ecosystem emerge. And we will serve our purpose at Buddhist Geeks, which is evolving Dharma. If we do that,
so
that's kind of
is InterbeingDAO like a project of Buddhist Geeks almost then, or
no? Well, by definition, no. It's not. It's just it's really just a beacon light. Right now, it's just a way to connect, and it's helped me personally connect already with a number of people, including a group who might be already doing something similar. So it might just be a way of kind of merging into something else.
I definitely know, you're almost like memeing it into existence.
Yes, exactly.
I think it's an extremely powerful concept. It's like, and actually something that I was found quite confusing and surprising when I first entered Web3, of people like putting up these flags without seemingly much like kind of behind them, and then suddenly like something's there, and it's it speaks to the power of putting up a pretty flag, and like the right flag at the right time, we can say. And it caught my attention, at least. We're talking about it this is the kind of memeing it into existence live, if you like, with you might listen to this. So
exactly. So it's like, for those people we can connect, and and hopefully we'll figure out a way to coordinate our coordinating and relate to each other in a way where we can actually do something good.
And so the third project that I've heard you mention, or heard your name mentioned in connection with, that maybe sounds relevant at this point then, is Metasangha.
Metasangha, yeah. Mm-hmm. This is another idea. This is an idea that I was really obsessed with and theorizing a lot about in 2015. And what we did at the time, we took this learning community in Buddhist Geeks and we said, hey, who else are you learning from? What other teachers or communities or people are you learning from? And we just took that and created a network map, and we said, oh, look, this is the kind of Metasangha, that we already exist in. We took the whole notion that, the way Google started their search, they just took the backlinks of the web. They saw how everything was already connected, and they gave you a way to kind of navigate that. So we sort of did that internally. Like, what does our community's Metasangha look like?
So I'm clear, that you're asking individuals like
Yes.
which other teachers are you
Yes.
listening to, what other books are you reading, and then you found, oh, okay, actually quite a lot of us are also listening to this, this person.
Yeah. Teachers and communities in particular. We didn't get into books or artifacts, but we did get into like, what other teachers or communities are you learning from right now actively? And we basically got, a network map, and we could see, oh, look here. And we intuitively, we knew already what the map looked like, but we learned a lot actually through seeing it, and which ones were weighted more than others, and which ones were closer to us in the network. And we could actually see the pattern of the great three traditions in Buddhism, the big three that are often talked about in global Buddhism, which are like, the early foundational Buddhism, the second turning Mahayana Buddhism, and the third turning Buddhism. So there's these different forms and flavors, and you could see them in the network map. Yeah. You could actually see them geospatially in relationship to each other. And you could see the communities that blended the two were in the middle between the two camps. And it was like, oh, okay, this really is an organizing principle in the network, more in the network, like, topography. So that was very interesting. And I wrote about, I said, like, in the future, we're going to have these sanghas of sanghas, these meta sanghas, these where we see that we're already in relationship, and we transcend our focus on our own systems and our own way of thinking, and we step into a meta-systemic relationship with each other, where we start to actually see there's a space in between these systems where there's a lot of potential for learning, meta-systemic learning. Like, we could be challenging each other in this space. We could be supporting each other in this space. We could be innovating new things in this space. This space could become the doorway through which the world gets to know all of our individual spaces, because it becomes bigger than us. People like go to the Metasangha and find, go talk to the Sorting Hat and find out which community you should be practicing with.
So, I mean, is it online? Can we check it out?
No, it's not. It's just it's a theoretical construct again. And to me,
actually make this network map though. This, when you say you saw,
we did, yeah. So we can share the notes. There's a Medium post where you can see the network map. Yeah, and in today's network map would look a lot different, because it's like 7 years later.
Yeah, but I'm now thinking about this in the kind of Web3 context. Like, something that I have felt for some time has been very important is to get comfortable with listing all of my teachers and influences and varied interests publicly. And although I'm like kind of professionally, I'm sort of more and more kind of working in the kind of Web3 space. Go to my website and you'll see how I've trained in meditation and conscious sexuality and plant medicine and so on, and all the rest of it. And I would be fascinated in some kind of like Metasangha type activity for the Web3, or at least kind of like regen Web3 space. And I strongly suspect that we would find that there are some like very important kind of unspoken shared influences in the communities like that connect us. I mean, and this conversation is an example of, and the one you had with Kevin Awoki, I guess, of saying, oh, okay, actually there are people who are really in the web, deeply in the Web3 space that are have been influenced by Buddhism and Dharma and meditation, and like let's talk about that, and like, because maybe it's important, and part of that actually might be for younger folks. So I'm actually connected with a really interesting group called DreamDAO, which is kind of mostly Gen Z, people under the age of 20 or so, and I think I sense some of them as kind of searching for like kind of deeper roots to this. It's like is Web3 is cool, but like, is that it? Like, where did it come from, and like how does it connect? So I'd love to talk more to you about Metasangha and as well, and maybe replicating something like that. And for this in this new space. But,
well, I think that the Web3 technology stack is enabling these kind of meta DAOs, these kinds of like common spaces that could emerge amongst communities and systems. And that to me is really exciting. Like, it's like I had the idea, but the technology wasn't there to enact it. Now the technology is starting to emerge to enact these kind of, I would call them wisdom commons, the creation of wisdom commons, like where we can find and identify the communities and people that we want to connect up with around something, some deeper purpose that we all share. And then we have a common shared governed space. Potentially it's tokenized or whatever, but like we can create these new spaces out of the connections that already exist.
Yeah.
And we don't have to compete on that. It's like the best collaborations win.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like at a basic level, it's just like surfacing like what else we're interested in. And it's happening. You can, in some way you could say that is something that's driven the kind of regenerative finance space of enough people who are already engaged one way or another with Web3 say, hey, we also care about the health of the planet, and like, can this technology like be in service of that rather than, just in service of like increasing our wallet balances? And it's very exciting to see that a very active community is forming around that. But I feel like that's only the beginning, really, and I strongly suspect that if we had the conversations, we would find that we were motivated by some kind of interesting and common communities, teachers, philosophies, and so on. So super interesting direction.
There's some very interesting nexes.
I mentioned to you before the call that I've applied to give a talk called Blockchain and Buddhism at Buddhafield Festival. So
nice.
And we've spoken about some of the projects at this intersection. So maybe we can go more down the direction of what does Buddhist thought, Buddhist philosophy have to offer Web3 and people working in Web3 at this time?
I mean, some of that is an easy answer because there's like, it's what it's already offering Web 2, it can offer Web 3, in terms of mind training and attentional skill training and things like that. That's basic.
I certainly I see a lot about people getting burnt out in the Web3 space because it's like on 24/7. Like people think I've left my Web2 job so that I can experience the freedom of Web3, and perhaps sometimes end up feeling not exactly free from just there being just no end to it. So
it's like
I'm seeing it and understanding it actually requires a much higher degree of sovereignty, self-discipline to keep boundaries there between, when's work time and when is it to switch off. So
that's a great point. That's a great point. So there's almost like a developmental requirement to be even probably able to function as a free agent in the Web3 space and flourish. So I would guess that's true.
And I'm wondering if any other kind of like lessons that you'd like.
What other things that Buddhism has to offer? Blockchains and Web3. I'm thinking about the more non-obvious ones here, because Kevin and I talked about freedom from happiness independent of conditions is what Buddhism in broad terms offers, and happiness dependent on conditions is what Web3 at its best should offer. And bringing those two together, I think, is important. But and then the basic.
Explain that second one. So the Web3 is about happiness dependent on conditions.
It's about providing conditions where people can be happy conditionally. And conditional happiness is like, because I have this, I'm happy. But because I've got water and food and energy and internet, like there's a certain level of baseline happiness and okayness that's present from those conditions. And if you're awake and you're enlightened and you're happy independent of conditions, if you lose all that stuff, you're still going to bum you out majorly.
The Web3 piece in that is, as in it's the ownership economy, it's the internet of ownership. It's the potential to actually kind of like own the memes of production. In
the memes of production. That's right. Yeah, that's the idea of like it's connected to a better and a wiser kind of livelihood structure. From a Buddhist philosophical point where I'm like, this is like helping with livelihood. And
it's saying but actually both are important.
Both are important. Both are part of a larger holism.
Made me think of a very large proportion of the broader crypto community, at least, is focused on number go up. Like their main interest in being involved in this space is to make as much money as possible. It's an interesting challenge in a way to kind of say, hey, are you sure that's what matters to you? Like, what if there was a different way to achieve this level of satisfaction without needing simply that number to go up? And then of course, like how much does that number need to go up for you to be satisfied?
Right. How wealthy do you need to be? Yeah. And the funny thing is, the same logic I think underlies other pursuits. So like me as a meditator in my 20s, I was doing the same exact logic of that. It was like, how many retreats do you need to go on? How enlightened do you need to get? How free do you need to be?
Yeah. And what's the answer? What's the answer, Vince?
And how much of a sage or a knower or a guru do you need to be? So it's like those, for me, those questions, I had the same kind of logic of like focused on the simple metric, and that's going to define happiness. And I'm just going to pour everything into that. And to me, it's a very rationalist point of view. It's like really simplifying reality into this very simple model and then just kind of cranking on it. And it's like, I don't think to me, that's a developmental waypoint, but it's not a form of development that's going to really serve us moving forward. Because I think we've got to grow up more in our capacity, as I have, and I'm sure you have. And most people, if they're given sufficient opportunity, like the quant people, like if they get tuned on to something, they have a psychedelic trip, or they listen to this podcast, they go, wait, what? And then suddenly they might find themselves falling down a rabbit hole and suddenly realizing, oh, there's more to life. Like it's multidimensional. It's not the single, it's not just the GDP, that matters.
Yeah.
So to me, we're talking about development in a way, like how do we grow up more and like express more mature forms of technology in systems and communities.
We've been tackling that, like picking the easy target in a way, because we've been like, okay, but there are people in the web.
The tech bro.
Yeah, exactly. That just making as much money as possible. But so maybe let's make this a bit more difficult. Like let's actually talk about Solarpunks. So the Solarpunk community. So, or if you like, in some sense, like the kind of refi community. So the people in the Web3 space, and maybe it's not just Web3. It's people kind of who are just like aware of and skilled in, optimistic about the potential for technology to change our society for better. Like what does Buddhism, or if you like more broadly, some of these psychotechnologies have to offer this kind of community who are kind of a bit past that, just caring about money stage of things? Like how do they fit in at this point?
Yeah. Okay. Well, here's the thing I love about Solarpunk. So Solarpunk, to me, one of the things they integrated was sort of the view of renewable tech and ecological awareness. Like they brought those two in relationship visually, and create an aesthetic where those were integrated. It wasn't like technology and ecology. It was like, boom, they're together. To me, there's another move that I think what you're doing with Lunarpunk could offer Solarpunk, which is something to do with like, okay, Solarpunk, even in its integration of technology and ecology and, vision of all these people and these, the buildings that are kind of like falling apart, but are also beautiful and living, like it's all focused on the outside, the external, the exteriors. The objective dimension of things. But Lunarpunk seems to be focused on the inside, the interior, consciousness, intersubjective awareness, relationship, like these kind of interior dimensions. And to me, the real potential is in integrating the two, the solar and the lunar, the inner and the outer, become one, where they're not separated. It's like, no, like it's the people who are dreaming up these visions are doing weird shit at night. And they're not talking about it because we have a culture that's obsessed, historically obsessed with material, external, objective reality. And so it's embarrassing to even say that you have a fucking Satori or an enlightenment experience. It's like, it's weird to say, hey, my self dissolved and I realized I was the one being that underlies all things.
What I'm hearing then is that the Solarpunks, part of the challenge is simply to talk authentically about the kind of experiences that we're having.
To out themselves.
So to out them, to actually talk about some of the experiences that that
and
motivated us
deepen
maybe to
them.
kind of care about this stuff in the first place.
Yeah.
And anecdotal evidence suggests that, that, yeah, absolutely, things like psychedelics and meditation and these other psychic technologies that we've mentioned have often been extremely important reasons why people are kind of on the Solarpunk or kind of regen end of things.
Yes.
And some,
Yes.
some people are talking about them, but I would agree with kind of what I hear you suggesting there, is that like it's a bit quiet right now, and it could be at the least interesting and possibly quite useful to actually just to be a bit more open about how some of these techniques, tools, experiences have influenced us. So yeah, well, hopefully this podcast is going to be one of the the kind of platforms that provides people the opportunity and the space to talk about that.
That's awesome.
A little bit. And of course, you're a good early guest to have, because you're already very open about how Buddhism and meditation have kind of shaped your worldview. But it'll be interesting to get on people who are maybe in the Web3 or just more on the technological end of things that haven't previously spoken so much about that, and see if they've had those experiences, and see if they're comfortable, to what extent they're comfortable speaking about them.
I mean, I guess I'm calling for people to be courageous and to own who they are, and to as best they can to do that in a public facing way, to be a person of integrity. And I think that's what people listen to. Like, that's what people want to hear, is integrity. They want to hear their own unbroken nature reflected in the things that they, engage in, I think, or sometimes we don't. Sometimes that's when we're at our best. When we're at our worst, we seek out the things that reflect our unbrokenness back to us.
Yeah. Integrity, and I think another word that's coming to mind is purpose as well.
Yes.
I can't remember who I was hearing speaking about this recently, but there's some sense, there can be a sense sometimes in the kind of Web3 DeFi space of trying stuff out, like just because it's possible, or just because it's interesting, or just because it's cool. And it's maybe time to say there's more or less an infinite number of like cool projects you could build with this technology,
right? But why?
But why? Yeah, like why are we doing this? And like, is it possible to actually focus ourselves and our efforts more in a particular direction, like for that purpose? And I think that, of course, that what I would suggest, that purpose is something deeply personal for each of us to come, to decide why am I here? What really matters to me? As far as I've got in articulating that, as I've put on my website, it's something like for the flourishing of life on Earth, and sense an increasing number of people in the space are coalescing around something like that, and evidenced in the growth of the refi movement and projects like Seeds and CleanDAO and so on. But yeah, just to kind of open that up as like a conversation that's okay to have, I think would be
within certain contexts. Yeah, we should be having the conversation with each other, at least.
What's the answer to that question for you, Vince? Like, what is the purpose that you are engaging with this Web3 technology and Solarpunk technologies more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, I shared with you earlier the purpose of Buddhist Geeks, which is very closely aligned with my personal purpose, which is evolving Dharma. And to me, there's a larger frame. The evolutionary frame is really helpful here, where it's like, there's all these different things emerging, and I think the ones that are purpose driven, like you said, there's a reason for their existence. They're well considered, their response to what's happening in the moment, and they are the ones especially that are born out of compassion and care and wise seeing. So I think those technological solutions could become part of the infrastructure of tomorrow. And so we should care a lot for them and their creation right now, because we might be living on top of them or off of them soon.
Solarpunk technologies, Web3 technologies in service of wisdom and compassion.
Absolutely. Why else?
Sounds like a good thing to aim for me. Yeah. So we pretty much hit the hour mark, Vince.
Okay,
I
great.
wonder if there's any final thoughts that you'd like to offer us, anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like to mention?
You know what, Stephen? I just remembered there is one important thing I did miss.
Please.
It was to your point about Buddhism and blockchain. I think the thing that's underexplored there is the generosity-based the unique generosity-based economics that Buddhism developed has to offer blockchain. That is, I see evidence of that being explored in different. Yeah, exactly. And what are the tools for enabling generosity as a means?
I'm super excited about the next version of Proof of Humanity. You familiar with Proof of Humanity?
I'm aware of it. Yeah,
they have this universal basic income project.
Yes,
they pay UBI tokens to everyone that registers as an authentic human on the platform.
Right.
At the moment, it's only running on Ethereum mainnet, so it's extremely expensive to transact with. But it's about to kind of launch in parallel or be accessible in parallel on Gnosis chain, which is a kind of side chain, very fast, very cheap. Evidence suggests it's already changing lives. Like the UBI basic income is worth around, last time I checked, was around $50 a month, which is maybe not so such a big deal if you're in a Western country, but if you're in many parts of the global South, the idea that there is right now a basic income project that's paying you $50 a month is huge news. It's particularly caught on in Argentina, which is the home country of Santi Siri, who's the founder and one of the lead developers. And it sounds like they have a really excellent team working on that. So how this links to this generosity piece, this Dana piece, is that so the Proof of Humanity project just pays out UBI tokens at a rate of 1 per hour to anyone that registers. That doesn't mean they have any value. What gives them value is if there's people buying them on the other side, if there's some demand for them. And that is one of the major ways that's happened so far is philanthropy, is people with money choosing to buy and burn UBI tokens. And there's now some efforts going on to encourage various DeFi projects to spend 1% of their income to buy and burn UBI tokens to ensure that they continue to have a value going forwards. And so that feels very
if there could be an emergent global UBI, that is a mechanism of a kind of generosity, a redistributive generosity. Well, especially
if the value of that UBI was being sustained through generosity, through the people that are lucky enough to have disposable income in some sense. I'm very excited to see where that vision goes. So thanks for the opportunity to just to jam on that at the end there. I guess we better wrap. It's been an absolute pleasure. So maybe speak to you again sometime, Vince. But until then, take care.
Thanks.